Session. Our last speaker today is Alaric. Alaric is the founder of Greenhouse, a substance addiction recovery center for marginalized and vulnerable communities. Having gone through a similar experience, Alaric has widely spoken about his own personal experience, and he advocates for for addiction to be viewed both as a mental health and a public health issue. So he will give an update on strategies to end HIV among persons who use drugs. Over to you, Alaric.
Hello. Hey, sorry. Thanks for having me today. I've been asked to present on people who use drugs in relation to ending HIV in Singapore. In doing this, I'd like to share with you what the Greenhouse has learned this year in working with marginalized and vulnerable communities to give some context to the work that's ahead. So just some disclaimers before we begin. I'm not an academic or clinician, so I'll be using general terms during this presentation. There may be some loss of precision. Rather than make broad assumptions about all drug users, I'll actually be sharing like aggregate information on Greenhouse clients so that we can draw our own conclusions. So this extract from our community blueprint, the section on people who use drugs. So we've actually like pinned down what is that we want to do. And I think it's going to be very helpful for us to implement them. I find it especially wonderful that like we arrived at this together after much discussion. But since we know what to do already, I think this presentation will be a bit more about like why drug use is happening, why it's important for us to address it, as well as how we can go about addressing it. So our agenda for today, we're going to look at some demographics to understand drug use better, look at what the recovery process is like, and make some recommendations based on that. For those of you who are not familiar with the Greenhouse, we are a substance addiction recovery center. Basically, we support people who are like sexual minorities, racial minorities, those who are HIV positive, formerly incarcerated, and trauma survivors, including the physically abused and sexually assaulted. We have supported quite a lot of people over the past 3.5 years, and we recently started supporting like friends, family, and lovers of people who use drugs also. It's actually really difficult for our clients to knock on our door and ask for help. There are many barriers to care that they're experiencing. Essentially, this is why all of the Greenhouse programs and services are completely free of charge. Until some of these barriers to care have been overcome, we need to be quite strategic. So this information is actually taken from a chat group that we have, 70 people who are active in recovery right now. As you can see, like most of our clients are gay men with chemsex issues, meaning like sexualized drug use. And this demographic, they are especially vulnerable to HIV. More than half of our clients have already caught HIV. The rest remain like undiagnosed or currently negative. But since a very, very low percentage of them are on PrEP, this means that until they successfully manage to overcome their drug use, they remain at risk of catching HIV and passing it on. Mental health, yeah, I didn't add in the citation, but just to mention, this was a very large and prestigious American study. Those who present with substance use disorders will often present with mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression, about 38% of them. So we actually looked at our own clients and discovered that the percentage is very much similar, almost there. But since other studies have really shown that LGBT are more likely to have mental health challenges, we need to ask ourselves, like, of all our clients right now, how many remain undiagnosed? And are they actually using drugs as a form of like self-medication? So as part of our intake assessment process, we do a brief trauma history. These are the kind of questions that we ask our clients to see if they've experienced them. The ones that are highlighted are the ones that pop out most often in our clients. I want to point out like the ones that are in red are specific to LGBT, and the ones in orange occur more often for LGBT. So if we look at this list, right, I'd like you now to guess like what percentage of our clients do you think have had these traumatic experiences? Do you think it's like 25%, 50%, 75%? Actually, every single one of the clients that we did this for have had one or more of these experiences. The average is 3. So is the greenhouse actually a substance addiction recovery center, or are we a trauma recovery center? Another citation from our community blueprint, like recreational drug use is more prevalent in gay and bisexual male populations. Essentially, like, are they more likely to use drugs because they're more likely to have experienced like stigma, discrimination, and bullying? The ones that we highlighted in red and orange. So based on the information that we just shared with you, like, let's ask ourselves, like, what kind of assumptions did we previously hold about people who engage in like camp sex without protection? Did we feel that they were irresponsible and reckless? Are we actually asking people who are in pain to behave in a very logical fashion? And are we asking people who have never learned how to love themselves to protect themselves? This is essentially what the greenhouse has learned this past year. Previously, we were using the disease model to explain addiction to our clients, and we realized that it really wasn't sufficient. There are actually physical, mental, and social dimensions to addiction, and all of them need to be addressed in order for the client to recover. So far we've talked about like why drug use is happening and why it's important for us to address it. Now I'd like to talk a bit about like how we go about addressing it. Once again, this is like part of our intake assessment process. We come up with a care plan for the client. It's essentially what the client needs to do in order to get better. So this client needs to take a HIV test because he was exposed to risk recently. He needs to see a psychiatrist at IMH for his anxiety and depression and take medication for it. Needs to attend smart recovery meetings every Wednesday. 12-step programs won't work for him because there was religious trauma. The mom will join our caregiver support group. He will continue with his individual counseling at WeCare, which is another addiction recovery center in Ubi, once every 2 weeks. And we will send him for our group therapy when it begins, because there's some relational issues he needs to work out, like how to get along with other gay men without the use of sex and drugs. So as you can see, like, recovery is really intense and complex. There are a lot of parts to it. If the client can stick to the care plan for like 6 months and stay clean, we can reduce some of this. If the client can stay clean for a year, generally he's going to do very well already. The most important part about the care plan that we should note is that it requires us to work with at least 3 community partners: Action for AIDS, IMH, and WeCare. So in other words, in order for us to provide holistic and integrated care, we need to start thinking about coordinated care. How can we start working more closely together, and how can we share information safely? So this is kind of like another view of what we just talked about. Like, the greenhouse has a 3-step ICC process: integrated consultation, community support, and customized care, trying to address like the physical, mental, social dimensions of it. These are the community partners that we currently work very closely with. Like, EFA has the most experience with HIV, we care with addiction recovery, and Uga Chaga with specific issues, for example, guilt and shame over sexual orientation. So as you can see, it's not about building internal capacity, it's about learning how to work together so that we can provide the best form of care. So when we look at this, we can start asking ourselves, like, where can your organization come in? So this is the greenhouse model. I just want to point out that even though we came up with this, we don't feel that it belongs to us, because it's essentially a needs assessment and we need to work together in order to provide it. I'd like to point out something that we found especially helpful. The last item under start, like investing in experience and expertise. So the reason why the greenhouse is suddenly having so much clarity about what to do and how to do it is because we actually had help from someone with specialized knowledge. Our director of training has a lot of experience with like the HIV epidemic in Castro, working with LGBT clients, and he's a trauma specialist. The training he provided was so good that basically 2 of our beneficiaries decided to pursue a career in counseling to help other people get better. We need to start thinking about, like, do we want to provide employment for people like that? We need to be able to like engage people who are able to help us like properly understand what's happening and to provide proper care. Also provide employment for people who have lived experience of addiction recovery. I feel that they're the best advocates. Something the greenhouse feels really strongly about is that we should stop re-traumatizing people who need care, trying to treat like sex addiction, love addiction, or drug addiction with like conversion therapy. It's a lot like trying to remove a splinter from our finger by removing the entire finger. It just makes completely no sense. The science on conversion therapy is quite clear. It doesn't work. It causes a lot of damage. So looking at this model, we can ask ourselves again, like, where does our organization come in? What are we prepared to try? Like if the greenhouse were to hold a workshop next year, would you come
Alert
and be
from
a part of
calendar.
it?
Start.
Sorry, like, will you be a part of it? Will you come and share your experience and expertise? So this is a summary of what we just talked about. Like, I hope we can end HIV in Singapore by addressing drug use in the community. Thanks for letting me share today.